What's up, guys? Before we get started here on the final drive, a big thank you to our partner, Microsoft Windows 11, the official operating system of the NFL and the exclusive sponsor of the LA Chargers. The all-new Windows 11 is here to bring you closer to what you love, like the Chargers and the final drive. Learn about all the awesome new features of Windows 11 at windows.com. And welcome in to a winning edition of the final drive. For Hayley Elwood, I'm Chris Hayre. Chargers win it in Philly, 27-24. What a game. They improved to 5-3 in the crazy AFC West. Hayley, just initial reactions to this win. First win in a while for this team.
Yeah, first win in a while for this team. And I'll quote Chris Rumpf's Instagram story where he said 1-0 vibes, which is really what this team needed. And guys have talked about it over the last couple of weeks and it hasn't really gone their way, but just getting that one and hopefully stacking from there. And the appropriately named Final Drive podcast, Final Drive for the Chargers, they got that ball back with just over 6 minutes to go, tied game, and they never looked back. That offense never looked back, and Philadelphia's defense couldn't stop them. So I think things like that, I think obviously the play of Justin Herbert, his stat line was incredible, and he sort of returned to the Justin Herbert that we know and love him to be. But overall, just a pretty good showing, especially from this Chargers offense, which really spread the ball around. And you look at someone like Keenan Allen, too, who had just a dynamic day. And it was very clear that chemistry with him and Herbert was back on and on the money all day today. So 1-0 vibes, again, to quote Rumpf, but a good one to get back in that win column for sure. As you said, especially, and I'm sure we'll talk about the AFC West later, but especially on a day where every single team in the AFC West has 5 wins right now.
It's so wild right now. And, you know, Chris Rumpf should be happy. He's being quoted here on the final drive. And for Philly, you know, for me, Hayley, it felt like the Washington game, although they needed a score to win it as opposed to just icing out the game. So to have the ball, to hold on to the ball, to convert on that 4th down and to have Dustin Hopkins win it. He got the game ball in the locker room. And, you know, this was a place that he's kicked a lot in from playing in Washington.
Yeah.
Missed the extra point, but really redeems himself at the end.
He does. And Brandon Staley said they wanted to finish the game with the football, and that they did. And then when it comes to Hopkins, I mean, yeah, you look at this game, there were 1, 2, 3 ties this game. So it just kind of went back and forth a little bit. But really the goal, as Staley said, was to finish the game with the football, was to finish in the 4th quarter, which they did. And I actually loved what Hopkins said, where he said he had to introduce himself to some of the guys in the locker room after the game because he still is so new to this team. But great sort of redemption story for him to come back after missing that extra point earlier and really, really just kick them to victory in the end. It was just one of those games where, like I said, it kind of went back and forth, but really, if you were able to hold on to the ball, you just needed that score to win. It didn't matter what kind it was. It was just you needed something, and they got that on today.
You mentioned it, Hayley. We'll start with Justin and just his performance. Listen, we're so used to seeing Justin have these incredible games where he puts up 300, 400 yards, 3-4 touchdowns. It wasn't what we're used to seeing the past couple of games against Baltimore and New England. 2 good defensive coordinators, defensive minds, and 2 good defenses. What a way to bounce back, though. 32 of 38, 356 yards, 3 total touchdowns. And I think what got him going in, you know, Keenan and Justin kind of alluded to is just that connection between those two, that opening drive, just kind of getting comfortable, getting back to Keenan. And Keenan obviously had a huge day.
Yeah, a very, very huge day. I think Brandon Staley had said this sometime last week that I think sometimes we're spoiled on Justin Herbert. We forget that he's only in his 2nd season in the NFL, and there still is so much that he hasn't seen yet. And so to have kind of the games that he had, you mentioned, against 2 really good defensive-minded coaches, Harbaugh, obviously a former special teams coordinator, but really, really good defensive game plans that went against him. Sometimes you get spoiled thinking like, oh, yeah, he's usually so on, but games like that happen in the NFL. And as we know, this season, it is a long, long season, but he was just on the money today. He also credited the offensive line, and he was never sacked today. And I think that Eagles defensive front is really, really strong, really tough. And so you can give credit. Staley gave them credit too. But as Staley mentioned, Herbert was, quote, outstanding in the game today. He was accurate. He was patient. You mentioned it. You saw that connection with Keenan again, just how good they are together. And you really felt like he was back in his groove, and you saw it, and he clearly was.
Keenan, his 30th 100-yard game. He's just a few yards short of 8,000 for his career. He'll surely get that against the Vikings next week. So just a big day for Keenan. And we saw Mike Williams, a big play again from him, a 49-yarder. Justin spread the ball around to 9 different receivers, but that was such a huge play in the game handling.
It was a huge play. And if you want to talk about spreading it around, these tight ends, they had a day for this Chargers offense. You look at, Jared Cook, 4 for 4 for 48. He had that good 2-point. Donald Parham, 3 for 3 for 39 and a touchdown. Steven Anderson, 4 for 4 for 39 and a touchdown. You really saw guys like that get involved. And, I think that's something too that had been missing over the last couple of weeks, was just the beauty of the ball to be distributed to a bunch of different receivers on this team. And it got going again today, and the game plan got them going again today. But the huge, that Mike Williams conversion was big, even though he didn't end up with probably the sort of mega stat line that we're also sort of used to seeing from him during the season. But overall, offensively, it was just a complete team effort, which is something that a lot of guys cited after the game and certainly helped get them the win.
You mentioned the tight ends. I just think that was such a huge part of this game. When Hunter Henry went on to New England and they brought in Jared Cook, and we saw flashes of Donald Parham, Steven Anderson was on the roster. But to see that collective unit, Trey McKitty too, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention him and just, his contributions today. To get contributions from the entire tight ends room, that really kind of helps make this offense even more lethal than it is with just Keenan, Mike, and Austin.
Absolutely. I'm going to mention a really funny Steven Anderson story, and I think you might know it, but I don't think a lot of other people do. A couple of years ago, I was at the Super Bowl in Atlanta, and it was when the Patriots were there and the Rams were there. Steven Anderson was on the Patriots at the time, and I helped host Mark Summers did a Double Dare sketch inside opening night, and I had called play-by-play for a Steven Anderson and Steven Gostkowski Double Dare game, if you will. And so when he came to the Chargers, I had introduced myself and I was like, this is so random, but I randomly met you at opening night. And it's just so good to see him kind of come on, because I don't want to say he's been a forgotten guy on this offense, but he does a lot of the grunt work. So to get involved in the passing game today and catch that touchdown is really, really awesome for him. And just like you said, seeing guys like that pick up the contributions of what the Hunter Henry loss was. We know Herbert loves a tight end. He was so great with Hunter last year, but these guys are really, really picking it up. And also Donald Parham, what did Staley call him? Basketball magic after the catch. Because he is so tall. It's just, there's no contest out there when he can go up and get it, because it's 6'8". Come on. But basketball magic from Donald Parham Jr., Chicken Parham, as he is affectionately known. Just awesome to see those guys. And also Staley gave him credit too for the blocking that they did. You mentioned Trey McKitty, some of those blocking, schemes that they added to sort of help with that offensive line really, really made a difference today. And again, just a complete game from that offensive standpoint.
Double Dare Steven, do you think a bigger highlight in his career so far is this Double Dare thing you're telling me about with Mark Summers, or this first touchdown of the game in Philly today?
I'd probably say the Philly touchdown. I'd probably go with that one. But who doesn't want to get slimed? Come on.
Yeah, listen, it may be a close call. We talk so much about the offense. The defense was down a lot of guys today, specifically in the secondary. They held their own. Philly kind of found their groove on the ground with Hurts and Jordan Howard specifically. But they did enough to win. And, I think that's all you can ask on the road is keep yourself in the ball game and eventually come out on top.
Yeah, I mean, they gave up 176 on the ground, though they gave up 115 in the first half. So you could kind of look at that second half and be like, oh, they clamped down a bit, which was good. But that still is, a concern. I'll say that, especially as you move forward into the season. We'll talk about the team's next opponent next week in the Minnesota Vikings and what they're able to do. But they did enough, as you said, that bend but don't break. They allowed that, game tying touchdown from Jalen Hurts to Devontae Smith, but yet they never saw the field again. So as long as the offense, and I know these guys have kind of talked about that, being able to get the ball back, kind of play that complementary game where the offense just kept it. Again, 6.5 minutes. It was a 4-minute situation in 6 minutes, but really sort of helped that unit out where they didn't have to go back out there and make any stops. They got the job done, and it was up to the offense to seal it and then Hopkins to kick it, and he did.
Yeah, Jalen Hurts 10 for 62 on the ground. Jordan Howard 17 for 71. Boston Scott 10 for 40. But the bend but don't break. That was kind of the theme today for the defense. And I think that this is the type of game, Haley, where it's a little chilly. It's on the road. Yeah. It's on the East Coast. It gives you a preview of maybe what to expect later in the year if you do get into the tournament, and the fact that you can win these games. And now I know Philly's record is 3-6, but they've been in a lot of these games. They brought the Bucks down to the wire a few weeks ago. Mm-hmm. So I think any game, as we saw today, especially in that early window, the NFL's wild, man. I mean, you cannot take anybody lightly. And, I don't care what the Eagles' record is. I mean, this was a big win for this team.
It was absolutely a big win for this team. And especially on a day like this, that was so crazy, that was so wild. You saw the Buffalo Bills losing to the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Unbelievable.
You saw craziness in the AFC West, the Denver Broncos just beating up on the Dallas Cowboys. I know Dallas kind of scored at the end and made it not as large as it really and truly was, but just a really, really crazy game. And that's a really good point that you make. Obviously, when you go into a very hostile environment like Philadelphia, I saw a tweet. I don't remember who it was from, but I did see a tweet that said, and you were there, you could attest to this, that game almost had a playoff kind of like atmosphere, that someone who was there actually cited that it felt that way. And maybe because it was, we got daylight saving time right now, turning late earlier, getting the lights turned on, you kind of get that Sunday night football-ish sort of feel, but it is big. And especially, in cold weather, and this team doesn't have many of those games left, but you look at Cincinnati and you look at Denver, those two games that are, I believe, end of November, early December. And then, like you said, if you get into the tournament, you're playing now in mid-January. And if you have to go on the road and to the East Coast or to a cold environment, it is going to be flipping cold. And so just getting used to that is, like you said, just really, really great for this team, and getting the win makes it even better.
I'll say this, the tailgate lots were lively early, very early. I will say that. Eagles fans came out, and I do think it's like the combination, like the fall, the nip in the air, the daylight savings. I actually love these 4 p.m. games on the East Coast because it's almost like a primetime game. Like after the first quarter, it's dark out, so it's like like you're playing under the lights. And I think it was cool to have this team experience that type of environment, and to have Justin really rise to the occasion. I think it puts to bed all the, we live in this like 24-hour news cycle where we're just so consumed by one game or a 2-game sample size. We forget all the amazing stuff Justin Herbert's done before these last 2 games. And today was just another reminder of that.
Yeah. And like you said, there's so much craziness that happened in the AFC that it truly is, when you want to use the cliche week to week league, it absolutely is. And I think moving forward, and I believe we talked about this the last time we were on, when the NFL had first added a 17th game, it was like, it's one more week, but it feels very, very long. And it still feels very, very long. And the way that some of these games are playing out every week, it really is anyone's game right now. Even the AFC West, which a couple of weeks ago, looked like there was a clear division in terms of where these teams were trending and where they were going. But now, again, every team in this division has 5 wins, and it's going to get really, really nuts here as we sort of hit, I guess we're at the halfway point now, if we want to do math.
We are. And Haley, it's a great set. We should talk about the AFC West because 5-4, I guess, is past the halfway point. 5-3, the Chargers are not even at the halfway point. I guess they'll be past it once they play the Vikings. But 5-3, tied with the Raiders at the top of the division. Obviously, it's early in the season, and that early tiebreaker kind of puts the Chargers at the top. What do you make of this AFC West? I mean, the AFC North, I looked at just all the divisions. The AFC North is also very, very tight. Yeah. But just the fact that the Broncos did what they did to the Dallas Cowboys, that the Chiefs, obviously no Aaron Rodgers, but they win 13-7 today. And then the Raiders losing on the road to the Giants just tightens this thing up that much more.
It's anyone's week, really. It's anyone's division, it almost feels like. And the Chargers feel like they have the most kind of complete team in a sense. But, that's why winning today, as we mentioned, was so hugely important. I think what Denver did was incredible. After they traded away Von Miller, that they go into Dallas, which that Cowboys team has been so hot. We obviously saw them in week 2, but they have just gone on. People are crowning them like the best team, not only in the NFC, but in the NFL. And they just got whooped today. Now, what's really interesting is when you look at next week, the Raiders and the Chiefs play each other. So you are going to start getting into these divisional games where, and much like the AFC North too, where teams are going to kind of start beating up on each other just within division, and maybe some stuff will even out then. But it is really, really interesting how this entire really AFC picture shakes out. But as you mentioned, the Chargers, though, being 2-0 in division is hugely important right now, just given the sort of win-loss record that they have, that they do have that leg up on the Raiders just because of that tiebreaker. But it's going to be really, really interesting. This whole conference, it's kind of a buckle up and let's see what happens the rest of the way, because it's wild. And today was wild.
It was. And these Eagles play the Broncos next week in Denver. So, I mean, that's not an easy game for Denver either, based on what we're starting to see from Philadelphia. And I think their commitment to the running game, it should be an interesting game in Denver. Now, the Chargers play the Vikings next week, who lost to the Ravens in overtime.
Yeah.
Just first glance at this game, Haley, what do you think?
Contain Dalvin Cook. It's what you got to do. And I think teams will understand. I think you saw kind of Philly have that command over the run game at one point during this game against the Chargers. And I think that's the most important facet. But then again, you look at, Minnesota's receiving core is not lacking. Obviously, Justin Jefferson, this is the big Justin game, the big AFC offensive rookie of the year game. When you look at the two Justins and what Minnesota was hoping would be at the end of last year. But one note that Courtney Cronin had tweeted that Mike Zimmer said after the game was they believe Harrison Smith will be out next week due to COVID protocols. That's a huge loss for their secondary for sure. But, that should be a good game. This is that weird 17th game, right? This is that weird, we go back to a couple of years ago where you play the NFC North, your opponent that finished the same as you in the NFC North. But my first blush is just contain Dalvin Cook. The guy's a monster out there. Madison, their run game is actually really, really good. And even though they've been losing, I mean, they're 3-5, but they took Baltimore to overtime in Baltimore. And Anthony Barr, I believe, had an interception on Lamar Jackson. I think our game had started. So I obviously, it didn't end up well for them because the Ravens ended up getting the ball back to kick it and win. But they played Baltimore tough. And so this will be really interesting. Another unfamiliar opponent, Linval Joseph revenge game. We'll see what happens, but should be good. Should be good. Back at SoFi. Dalvin
Cook 17 for $110 today. And you're right. I mean, that's priority A, B, and C, right? Is to contain Dalvin Cook, contain that running game. And, Kirk Cousins, he's been playing pretty decent ball this year. He was 17 to 28, pair of touchdowns today, passer rating of 104. On the road against the Ravens, and Chargers were obviously there a few weeks ago. So the Vikings certainly won't be a pushover at SoFi Stadium. Anything else stand out to you tonight, Haley, from this game? There was so much, I think, offensively too. The fact that Justin spread the ball around so much, and the offense kind of picked things up. And I thought special teams was solid today as well.
They were. You saw really, really great returns from Andre Roberts, and that was something that obviously this team had been lacking prior to signing him. I thought we obviously talked about Keenan, but I thought Brandon Staley said something really notable about him, and that was that he set the example in practice this week, and that as good as he is on the field, he is even better from a leadership standpoint. And those of us who have been around Keenan for years now, I mean, we all know it and we see it, but you forget that he's the elder statesman on this team from a Chargers perspective. He's the longest tenured original Charger on this team now. And just to kind of see, as frustrated as he was, and we could all tell that, and he was open about it after last week's game, to kind of come around and have the game that he did today. But for Staley to say he really set the tone in practice all week, that just says leaps and bounds about the type of player and person that he is. And I just thought that was really notable.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I think sometimes I don't take for granted, but I think sometimes that maybe the league takes for granted just how good Keenan Allen is, and today was just another example of that. So big win for the Chargers, Haley. They're 5-3. The Vikings on deck on Sunday. Chargers Podcast Network, couple things, guys. Playmakers Wednesday. Who we got, Haley?
We are going to get Natara Holloway from the league office, and she does a really, really great job putting on a couple forums for the general managers forum, the quarterback summit every year, just to get a little inside perspective on some of the things that the league is doing on their end to increase diversity and to increase opportunities in the game. Really going to be excited to talk to her. I got a chance to sit in on both of those summits earlier this off season, and it was just a really interesting perspective. So looking forward to talking to her.
Yeah, check that out. Playmakers on Wednesdays, Chargers Weekly Thursday. And Hayley, running for history, episode 1 was Friday. Episode 2, I think, is going to be my favorite one because it's all about the draft. And I know you were heavily involved in this one.
Yeah, this episode, if you want the inside story on the draft of 2001 and the trade that we said it so many times, but it's true, just truly changed the trajectory of both the Chargers and the Atlanta Falcons, the Michael Vick for LaDainian Tomlinson trade. This is a big one. Tune in. We have amazing guests as you had in episode 1. We have amazing guests in this episode, including Jim Trotter, Sam Farmer, Ed Werder, John Clayton, guys who really kind of knew the inside story of that draft. I know you had a great interview with Ed Werder talking about just craziness that happened when that trade went down. And then obviously LT just kind of sharing his thoughts. And don't forget, they also took Drew Brees in that second round. So this is a big episode. We're really excited about this project. It's been fun to work on, right, Chris?
It's been great. And these like stories, like you mentioned, like, Jim Trotter being around the team and being able to kind of share some nuggets and anecdotes. And, Ed Werder was there at Chargers Park, and he was supposed to be covering the number 1 overall pick, and then I got traded. So Ed talks about that. And you mentioned it, just the fact that LT and Brees were drafted back to back. It's been fun going down memory lane with this project because obviously it's about LT's single season touchdowns record, but we start from the beginning, and just all the stories to get to that point have been so fun to tell.
I think one thing too, and you talk about maybe, not taking Keenan for granted, and I'm not saying we take our jobs for granted, but sometimes you forget when you're in the presence of greatness, if you will, the guys that we get to deal with on a daily, I won't say daily with someone like LT, but on a basis and cadence as we do. And I think when you get to sit them down and hear stories like this and talk to them in the way that we both have, it really, really is something truly, truly special. And as someone who grew up in San Diego and was in high school and had graduated high school that 06 season, and those Chargers teams, man, they were so good back then. It's kind of really cool to revisit it from that perspective, but it's been awesome. Those inside baseball stories, like you said, those are the kind of meat that we're hoping to give all of our listeners and viewers. And you got that in episode 1. You'll definitely get that in episode 2 also.
No question. Can't wait for Friday, episode 2 of Running for History. All right, that's going to do it for us. For Hayley Elwood, I'm Chris Hayre. This has been The Final Drive. We'll see you next Monday after Chargers Vikings.